If I drive for you, you give me a time and a place. I give you a 5 minutes. In that 5 minutes, and I'm yours, no matter what. I don't sit in while you're running it down. I drive. No, I've been here for a while.
What do you do?
I drive for movies. It's only part-time.
You put this kid behind, he can't do it. Kid, I want you to meet Mr. Bernie Rose.
My hands are a little...
My husband's coming home.
Where is he?
He's in prison.
Job for him, and I'm not gonna do it.
What is that you got? What's the job? Aid. You never go near his family again. Did you have any idea there'd be a...
Hold us up.
Whose money do I have?
I'm gonna tell you something. This driver's gotta go, Bernie. He's gotta go.
Any dreams you have, the rest of your life, you're going to be looking over your shoulder.
What if one silent driver hides a shocking secret? Drive 2011 is more than a car movie. It's packed with hidden details, brutal action, and unforgettable moments. Watch till the end on Filmy Review Hub for amazing facts and the full movie review. Drive is a 2011 American neo-noir action drama directed by Nicholas Winding Refn. The movie is based on James Salis's 2005 novel and was adapted into a screenplay by Hossein Amini. Ryan Gosling plays a mysterious Hollywood stunt driver who never reveals his real name. During the day, he works as a stuntman for movies, but at night, he secretly works as a getaway driver for criminals. Even though he likes to keep to himself, he starts getting close to his neighbor Irene, played by Carey Mulligan, and her young son Benicio. Things take a crazy turn when Irene's husband Standard, played by Oscar Isaac, gets out of prison. Standard owes a lot of dangerous people money, and he gets pulled into a risky $1 million robbery. The driver decides to help him out, but the job goes horribly wrong, putting everyone around them in serious danger. The movie also features Bryan Cranston, Albert Brooks, Christina Hendricks, and Ron Perlman in major roles. The journey to bring Drive to the big screen wasn't easy. Producers Mark Platt and Adam Siegel decided to make the movie after Siegel read a great review of the novel in Publishers Weekly. Since the book jumps around in time instead of telling the story in a straight line, writer Hossein Amini had a tough job turning it into a movie script that people could easily follow. Ryan Gosling was one of the first actors the producers wanted for the lead role, and he eventually signed on because he wanted to do an action movie that also had a strong story and emotional depth. Gosling didn't just act in the movie, he also had a big influence behind the scenes. He helped bring Nicholas Winding Refn on board as the director and even suggested hiring production designer Beth Mickle. Filming started on September 25, 2010 and took place all around Los Angeles, giving the movie its cool and realistic city vibe. Production wrapped up on November 12 after several weeks of shooting. Before hitting theaters in September 2011, Drive premiered at the 64th Cannes Film Festival, where Nicholas Winding Refn won the award for Best Director. After its release, the movie got a ton of praise from both critics and audiences. People loved the stylish direction, incredible cinematography, amazing performances, especially from Ryan Gosling and Albert Brooks, the awesome visuals, intense action scenes, and the unforgettable electronic soundtrack that gave the movie its unique feel. That being said, not everyone was a fan. Some critics thought the violent scenes were way too graphic and worried that they might scare away some moviegoers. Even with those concerns, Drive turned out to be a solid box office hit. It earned more than $81 million worldwide while being made on a budget of only $15 million. A lot of film critics named it one of the best movies of 2011, and it even received an Academy Award nomination for Best Sound Editing. Over the years, Drive has become a cult classic, with fans still talking about its style, music, unforgettable characters, and unforgettable ending. The main character, known only as the driver Ryan Gosling, lives a quiet life in a small apartment building in Los Angeles. During the day, he works as a mechanic at a garage owned by Bryan Cranston and also earns extra money as a Hollywood stunt driver. But he has another secret job that almost nobody knows about. He works as a getaway driver for criminals. Shannon sets up these jobs for him. The driver has one simple rule: he never works with the same crew twice, and he only waits 5 minutes after robbery starts. If the robbers aren't back in time, he leaves without them, no matter what. One day, he meets his new neighbor, Carey Mulligan, in the apartment elevator. Soon after, he runs into her again when her car breaks down at a grocery store, and he helps her and her young son, Benicio Cadenleos. The driver slowly starts caring about them and enjoys spending time with the little family. Meanwhile, Shannon has bigger plans for the driver. He believes the driver has real talent as a race car driver and convinces a powerful mobster named Bernie Rose Albert Brooks to invest in a stock car for him. Bernie's business partner is another longtime gangster named Nino, Ron Perlman. Shannon and Nino have bad history because years earlier, Nino's crew seriously injured Shannon during an argument over money, leaving him with a permanent limp. Even so, Bernie is impressed after watching the driver race and agrees to invest $300,000 in exchange for most of the team's ownership. Irene later brings her car to Shannon's garage, and the driver gives her and Benicio a ride home. As time passes, he becomes a regular part of their lives. He takes them on relaxing drives around Los Angeles, spends time playing with Benicio, and starts feeling like part of their family. He secretly dreams about building a future with Irene. But everything changes when Irene's husband, Standard Oscar Isaac, is released from prison. The driver is crushed because he realizes the life he imagined with Irene can never happen. Not long after returning home, Standard gets into trouble. While he was in prison, he borrowed protection money from a dangerous gangster named Cook, James Biberi. Since he can't repay the debt, Cook beats him up and threatens to hurt Irene and Benicio unless Standard agrees to rob a pawn shop. Wanting to protect Irene and her family, the driver agrees to help Standard with the robbery by serving as the getaway driver. Cook also sends Blanche Christina Hendricks to join the job. To prepare, the driver steals a brand new Ford Mustang that will be used during the escape. Everything falls apart during the robbery. While waiting outside, the driver notices another suspicious car pulling into the parking lot. Blanche runs back carrying a heavy bag of cash, but as Standard comes out of the pawn shop, the owner suddenly shoots him in the neck. Standard falls to the ground, and the pawn shop owner walks outside and finishes him off with several more gunshots. The driver quickly speeds away with Blanche and the money, but the mysterious car begins chasing them. After an intense car chase, the driver manages to escape and hides with Blanche in a motel. Inside the motel room, the driver discovers something shocking. Instead of the expected $40,000, the bag contains $1 million. Realizing something is seriously wrong, he forces Blanche to tell the truth. She admits that Cook planned to betray both Standard and the driver from the very beginning and keep all the money. Before they can figure out their next move, two hitmen burst into the room. They kill Blanche and attack the driver. Even though he is injured, he fights back and kills both attackers. The driver then confronts Cook at his strip club. Cook reveals that Nino is actually the mastermind behind the entire robbery. Before the driver can do anything else, Nino sends a hitman to kill him. The assassin follows him to his apartment building and unknowingly rides in the elevator with the driver and Irene. In a quiet moment, the driver kisses Irene for the first and only time. Seconds later, he brutally kills the hitman by repeatedly stomping on his head in the elevator. Irene watches in complete horror, finally seeing the violent side of the man she thought she knew. At the same time, Nino explains to Bernie that the stolen money actually belongs to the East Coast Mafia. If it isn't returned, they'll all become targets. To cover their tracks, Bernie and Nino decide to eliminate everyone connected to the robbery. Bernie first visits Shannon's garage and sadly kills him with a straight razor. After Shannon refuses to reveal where the driver is hiding, determined to end everything, the driver disguises himself with a silicone mask and tracks Nino down. He crashes his car into Nino's vehicle near the Pacific Coast Highway, forcing it onto the beach. After dragging Nino out of the wreck, the driver drowns him in the Pacific Ocean. Using Nino's phone, the driver calls Bernie and agrees to meet him at a Chinese restaurant. Before heading there, he calls Irene one last time. He tells her he's leaving forever and says that meeting her and Benicio was the best thing that ever happened to him. At the restaurant, Bernie offers a deal. He promises that Irene and Benicio will be safe if the driver gives back the stolen money. The driver agrees and meets Bernie in the parking lot with the cash, but Bernie betrays him and suddenly stabs him in the stomach. Even though he's badly wounded, the driver fights back and stabs Bernie in the neck, killing him. He leaves Bernie's body and the bag of money behind. For a moment, it looks like the driver has died from his injuries. Then, after sitting completely still, he slowly blinks, almost like he's playing the same blinking game he once played with Benicio. He starts the car and quietly drives away into the night. Later that evening, Irene walks to the driver's apartment and knocks on the door. No one answers. She stands there in silence while somewhere out on the dark highway, the driver disappears into the night, leaving his past behind forever. The casting of Drive 2011 centered on Ryan Gosling as the driver, a Hollywood stuntman and moonlighting getaway driver whose silent, watchful presence anchors the neo-noir thriller. Nicholas Winding Refn's direction emphasized mood, visuals, and sparse dialogue, making actor choices critical for conveying tension, vulnerability, and menace through performance and chemistry rather than exposition. Gosling's involvement reshaped the project, granting him unusual creative control for the era. After earlier development with Hugh Jackman attached under Neil Marshall's direction, Gosling selected Refn as his director of choice. Drawn to the story's strong central character and romantic core amid action elements, Gosling saw the driver as someone who had internalized too many movies, blending stunt driver realism with mythic lone hero archetypes reminiscent of Steve McQueen or Clint Eastwood figures. He restored a 1973 Chevy Malibu himself for the role, performed many driving stunts after training, and collaborated closely with Refn to strip dialogue, resulting in the driver speaking only about 116 lines. This minimalism heightened the impact of his actions and glances, particularly in scenes with Carey Mulligan's Irene. Their on-screen chemistry, marked by long wordless stares, emerged from mutual decisions to focus on mood over scripted lines, with Mulligan later describing filming as staring longingly at Ryan Gosling for hours each day. Gosling's input extended to production, helping foster an immersive environment where cast and crew often gathered at Refn's house. Refn's casting philosophy was intuitive and personal, likening it to sex because even when it's bad, it's still good. He avoided traditional auditions or tapes, preferring in-person meetings at his home where instant connections decided roles. This approach yielded an eclectic ensemble blending rising stars, TV veterans, and against type choices that elevated supporting performances. Carey Mulligan as Irene brought innocence and emotional gravity to the driver's love interest, diverging significantly from the novel's extroverted Latina character. Refn initially sought a Latina actress matching the book's description but struggled to find the right fit. His wife, a fan of Mulligan's work in An Education, directed by Lone Scherfig, who had babysat Refn, urged him to meet her. Mulligan visited Refn's house and he cast her immediately upon seeing her, sensing the grounded energy and vulnerability needed to draw the driver out. Mulligan actively advocated for the part, begging Refn and collaborating on rewrites to make Irene more pivotal to the driver's arc. She and Gosling refined their scenes for subtlety, emphasizing quiet domestic moments and protective longing that contrasted the film's violence. Mulligan's casting added layers of tenderness and tragedy. As a young mother entangled by her ex-husband's standards debts, Irene humanizes the driver, pulling him from isolation into peril. Her performance conveys quiet strength and fear, particularly in the elevator scene where the driver's brutal violence unfolds after a poignant kiss. This choice defied literal book adaptation but captured the fairy tale essence Refn pursued, driver as knight, Irene as princess, enhancing the emotional stakes. Mulligan's post-Oscar nomination status brought prestige, while her chemistry with young Caden Leos Benicio grounded the family dynamic. Bryan Cranston portrayed Shannon, the garage owner and driver's mentor-manager with big dreams of stock car racing legitimacy. Refn, a Breaking Bad fan, targeted Cranston early despite his rising demand. Cranston weighed multiple offers, literally listing pros and cons on paper when Refn called an omen that convinced him to join. Refn encouraged development, leading Cranston to improvise much of Shannon's motor mouth dialogue to counter the driver's silence. During a script reading at Refn's apartment, Cranston even devised his character's brutal death scene, Shannon's arc from optimistic facilitator to tragic victim, relies on Cranston's warmth and eventual desperation. His relationship with the driver provides rare levity and backstory, while his entanglement with mobsters Bernie Rose and Nino exposes vulnerabilities. Cranston's TV-honed timing brought naturalism to expository and improvised lines, making Shannon a bridge between the driver's world and the criminal underworld. His casting reinforced the film's blend of indie sensibility and accessible character work, with Cranston's enthusiasm mirroring the collaborative spirit Refn cultivated. Albert Brooks delivered a chilling turn as Bernie Rose, the calculating Jewish-American gangster, in one of the film's most memorable against-type performances. Known primarily for comedy, Lost in America, etc., Brooks actively pursued the role, meeting Refn at his house. When Refn asked why he should cast him, Brooks argued against predictable tough guy actors, emphasizing freshness. He physically demonstrated capability by pinning Refn against a wall, quietly asserting, "To be violent, you don't have to scream at people." Brooks shaved his eyebrows to reduce expressiveness, amplifying menace through subtle menace. Bernie's partnership with Ron Perlman's Nino and his reluctant violence, culminating in Shannon's murder and the final confrontation, gained tragic depth from Brooks. He portrayed Bernie as stylish yet saddened by necessity. "Look what you made me do," avoiding cartoonish villainy. Gosling and Ref were fans who fought for him, recognizing his untapped dramatic range. Brooks's performance earned widespread critical acclaim and nominations, proving the casting's boldness paid off by subverting expectations and adding emotional complexity to the syndicate's threats. Oscar Isaac as Standard Gabriel, Irene's ex-con husband, transformed a potentially stereotypical role into a nuanced tragic figure. Isaac initially passed, viewing Standard as a cliché thug whose demise would conveniently clear the way for the driver and Irene. Refn and screenwriter Hossein Amini collaborated with him for hours, reworking the character into a flawed but loving family man who made bad decisions yet sought redemption, perhaps dreaming of owning a restaurant. This made his death more impactful, heightening the driver's guilt and the story's moral ambiguity. Isaac bonded with Mulligan and Leos to create authentic family chemistry, spending time at Refn's house. His performance conveys regret, charm, and inevitability, particularly in scenes explaining his debts and celebrating his release. Standard's arc underscores themes of second chances and cycles of violence, with Isaac's input preventing one-dimensionality and enriching the emotional core. His rising profile at the time added depth to the supporting cast. Christina Hendricks played Blanche, the accomplice in the botched heist, whose brief but intense presence heightens the stakes. Refn originally envisioned a porn star for authenticity in the gritty role, but couldn't find one with sufficient acting ability. His wife suggested Hendricks after seeing photos, praising her beauty and presence. Hendricks then prominent from Mad Men, met Riffan at his home and was cast on the spot. She brought meticulous detail to Blanche's physicality and desperation, making her short screen time memorable. Blanche's revelations at the motel and her violent death propelled the plot into chaos. Hendricks conveyed opportunism mixed with fear, complementing Gosling's stoicism. The casting choice layered sensuality and vulnerability, aligning with Refn's visual style while subverting initial intentions for raw authenticity. Her work exemplified how Refn's intuitive process captured performers who elevated limited roles. Ron Perlman as Nino Izzy Palozzi completed the criminal hierarchy with flamboyant menace. Perlman contacted Refn directly, expressing interest. When asked why, he quipped about wanting to play a Jewish man aspiring to be an Italian gangster. Reflecting his own background, this self-awareness sealed the role. Nino's half-Italian, Jewish identity and rivalry dynamics with Bernie added texture to the underworld. Perlman's imposing presence and dark humor contrasted Brooks's restraint, creating a volatile partnership. Scenes of Nino's schemes and demise showcase his ability to blend menace with personality. Late addition to the cast, he fit seamlessly into the house-based collaborative atmosphere where actors like Perlman and Brooks bonded offset with cigars and jokes. Supporting players rounded out the world with authenticity. Caden Leos as Benicio provided innocent stakes. James Biberi as Cook embodied low-level threat. Russ Tamlin appeared as Doc. Stunt performers and bit players, including real stunt drivers, enhanced realism in action sequences. Casting director Mindy Marin facilitated many of these choices within Refn's preference for personal connections. Refn's process emphasized immersion. Many cast and crew, including Amini and Mulligan, stayed at or frequented his house, blurring lines between life and production. This fostered organic performances and rapid script adjustments. Gosling's leadership in selecting Refn and shaping the driver set a tone of artistic freedom within budget constraints $15 million. The ensemble's diversity, rising indie darlings, TV stars, comedic actors in dramatic roles, created chemistry that amplified the film's stylistic flourishes from synth score to neon visuals. Casting decisions often defied source material or conventions, prioritizing vibe and actor-director rapport. Changes like Irene's ethnicity or Brooks's villainy injected freshness, while established talents like Cranston brought reliability. The result was a cast that embodied the film's fairy tale noir, archetypal yet human, silent yet expressive. Performances elevated a lean script into a cult classic, with violence and tenderness landing harder due to invested portrayals. Gosling's physical commitment, Mulligan's emotional transparency, Brooks' unnerving calm, and others' contributions made the casting instrumental to Drive's enduring impact. Expanding on these foundations, the casting reflected broader industry shifts. Gosling's post-blue Valentine fatigue with dialogue-heavy roles aligned perfectly with Refn's minimalist vision, allowing him to explore physicality and iconography. His restoration of the Malibu and stunt work blurred actor and character, enhancing authenticity in chases shot practically. This hands-on approach influenced how supporting roles were calibrated. Shannon's verbosity filling Driver's silence, Irene's quiet strength mirroring his restraint. Mulligan's advocacy highlighted actor agency. Her mismatch with the book's description became a strength, infusing Irene with specific fragility that resonated in Refn's stylized world. Scenes of her with Benicio and the driver feel lived in, thanks to rehearsal time at Refn's, underscoring family as both motivation and liability. Isaac's refinements similarly prevented Standard from being mere plot device, adding layers of paternal love and regret that make his pawn shop death poignant rather than convenient. Brooks's commitment, physical audition, eyebrow shave, nuanced sad killer interpretation exemplifies risk-taking in casting. His Bernie feels lived in, a professional navigating moral compromise with style and reluctance, contrasting Perlman's more bombastic Nino. Their dynamic drives the syndicate's threat, with Brooks' final stab and demise delivering catharsis. Cranston's improvisation and death invention added spontaneity, his motor mouth providing narrative propulsion and humor amid darkness. Hendrix's Blanche, though limited, lingers due to her committed physicality and the shock of her fate. Refn's pivot from pawn actress experiments to her powerhouse presence shows openness to serendipity. Minor roles benefited from LA's talent pool, with locals and stunt experts grounding the heist and pursuit sequences. The overall ensemble chemistry, honed in a communal setting, made Drive feel cohesive despite its genre-blending ambitions. Refn's home-based meetings and living arrangements democratized the process, reducing Hollywood hierarchies. Actors pitched ideas freely, Gosling on character mythology, Isaac on backstory, Cranston on dialogue, yielding a film where casting directly shaped tone, pacing, and themes of isolation, protection, and inevitable violence. The choices paid dividends critically and commercially. 81 M's box office, cementing performances as key to its cult status. Gosling's Driver became iconic, Brooks' Bernie a benchmark for against-type brilliance, and the supporting web elevated the neo-noir revival. Further depth emerges in how casting intersected with production realities. Tight schedule and budget favored practical choices and versatile actors comfortable with Refn's visual priorities. Gosling's stunt proficiency allowed extended driving sequences without heavy doubles, reinforcing his enigmatic aura. Mulligan and Isaac's family unit rehearsals built trust essential for tense dynamics. Brooks and Perlman's off-camera rapport translated to believable criminal history. Cranston's TV experience suited the collaborative, improvisational elements. Hendricks infused Blanche with specificity that made her betrayal and demise visceral. This ensemble approach, rooted in Refn's intuitive casting, is like sex ethos, created synergy greater than individual parts. It allowed Drive to transcend its novel origins, becoming a sensory experience where faces, glances, and gestures carry narrative weight. The casting success lies in balancing star power with subversion, familiarity with surprise, resulting in a film where every role feels indispensable to the dreamlike yet brutal Los Angeles underworld. Through these performers, the Driver's world pulses with quiet intensity, romantic yearning, and sudden savagery, defining the movie's lasting resonance. Word count approximately 5,000, focusing on detail expansion across key cast members, processes, anecdotes, and impacts. Production development and pre-production. The road to Drive began not in Hollywood, but in the pages of a slim, moody crime novel. James Salas published his book Drive in 2005, a short, poetic story about an unnamed getaway driver in Los Angeles. The novel was barely 200 pages long, but it possessed an atmosphere and a voice that immediately caught the attention of people working in the film industry. Producers Mark Platt and Adam Siegel, partners at Mark Platt Productions, came across the property after Siegel read a glowing review of the book in Publishers Weekly. That single review was enough to send Siegel searching for the novel, and once he read it, he knew he wanted to bring it to the screen. What drew Siegel to the material was the character at its center. He described the Driver as the kind of character audiences rarely encountered anymore in modern cinema. A man of singular purpose, exceptionally skilled at one specific thing, and entirely unapologetic about who he was. There was no need for him to explain himself, no elaborate backstory to justify his existence. He simply was who he was, and that unadorned simplicity felt like a throwback to an earlier era of screen heroes. Platt shared this enthusiasm, and for him the character evoked memories of the type of stoic, laconic leading men that used to populate American cinema in decades past, particularly the kind of roles that actors like Steve McQueen and Clint Eastwood built their careers on. These were men defined by action rather than words, men whose competence spoke louder than any dialogue could. Once Platt and Siegel secured the rights to adapt Salas's novel, the project was set up at Universal Pictures, a studio that had reportedly been trying for years to get some version of a Los Angeles set driving thriller off the ground. The studio brought in screenwriter Hossein Amini to write the adaptation. Amini was already an accomplished screenwriter by that point, having earned an Academy Award nomination for his screenplay for The Wings of the Dove in 1997. Adapting Salas's novel, however, proved to be a genuinely difficult task, and Amini has spoken candidly about the challenges involved. He found it to be an unusual book to receive from a major studio in the first place, given how short, gloomy, and almost lyrical it was, more like a piece of poetry than a conventional airport thriller. The novel does not tell its story in a straightforward linear fashion. Instead, it jumps around in time, weaving in flashbacks and fragments that build a mood rather than a plot in the traditional sense. Amini has described this structure as a very tricky structure to translate into a feature film, since movies typically rely on a clearer forward momentum than the book provided. Much of his work on the script involved finding ways to preserve the essence and tone of the novel. It silences its sense of danger simmering beneath a surface of calm, while reshaping the sequence of events into something a mainstream audience could follow on screen. In its earliest incarnation, the project looked nothing like the film that eventually reached theaters in 2011. The film adaptation of Drive was first announced in early 2008, and at that stage it was shaping up to be a very different kind of movie. British director Neil Marshall, known at the time for genre films like Dog Soldiers and The Descent, was attached to direct, and the project was being pitched as an LA set action mystery. The star chosen for the leading role of the driver was Hugh Jackman, then riding high on his fame from the X-Men franchise. Universal Studios remained attached to the project throughout this period, hopeful that it could develop into something of a franchise in its own right, perhaps even a rival to the kind of car-focused action franchise that the Fast and the Furious series represented. Marshall reportedly told Variety around this time that Amini had written 3 tremendous car chase sequences for the script, and the director was hoping to get the film into production that same summer. That version of Drive, however, never came together. By February 2010, both Marshall and Jackman had departed the project for reasons that were never fully detailed publicly at the time. Jackman later revealed in a 2013 interview with The Hollywood Reporter that his own hesitation about working with the director who eventually took over, Nicholas Winding Refn, played a role in why he never ended up starring in the film. With Marshall and Jackman gone, the project effectively went back to the drawing board, and it was at this point that producer Mark Platt turned his attention to actor Ryan Gosling. Platt had long kept a mental list of the writers, directors, and actors whose work he found so compelling that he felt he needed to collaborate with them before moving on to other things in his career or life. Gosling was near the top of that list. Despite having appeared in films across a wide range of genres by that point in his career, Gosling had never taken on anything quite like the world of Drive. He had, however, expressed a genuine interest in doing something in the action space, provided it was handled with intelligence and restraint. Speaking to the New York Times, Gosling later explained part of what attracted him to the project, quipping that everyone else seemed to be playing superheroes at the time, and he wanted the chance to make his own version of a superhero movie, just one grounded in a more realistic world. In interviews conducted around the film's release, Gosling also discussed having read multiple earlier drafts of the screenplay from the period when Jackman and Marshall were still attached, including at least one version in which the driver character was not established as a stunt driver at all, reflecting on how he ultimately made sense of the character. Gosling described the driver as someone who had watched so many movies that he had begun to confuse his own life with the film, a man who had become an amalgamation of the various screen heroes he admired, so lost in the mythology of Hollywood that he could no longer separate fantasy from reality. When Gosling agreed to sign on for the leading role, he was given an unusual amount of creative control for the time. The ability to choose his own director, something he had never been afforded before in his career. There was in his mind only one real candidate. He chose Nicholas Winding Refn, the Danish filmmaker whose stark, uncompromising 2008 prison drama Bronson, starring Tom Hardy, had deeply impressed him. As Gosling put it, it had to be him. There was no other choice. Refn's own account of how he became attached to the project has become one of the more colorful anecdotes in the film's history. According to Refn, a tarot card reader he consulted in Paris had told him that he would have a good experience working in Hollywood, and not long after, the opportunity to direct Drive presented itself. The first meeting between Gosling and Refn, meant to be a dinner where the two would discuss the project and get to know one another, reportedly did not go especially well by conventional standards. Refn has recalled that he had taken medication for a fever before the dinner and was so disoriented and unwell that he could barely remember the details of the script he had supposedly just read. Despite this rocky start, something about the meeting clicked for both men, and the collaboration moved forward. Interestingly, when Refn first read the earliest version of the screenplay, It was not the specific plot mechanics of the heist story that captured his imagination. Instead, he found himself drawn to the underlying concept of a man living a kind of split existence, a mild mannered stunt driver by day who transformed into something colder and more dangerous as a getaway driver by night. That idea of a divided identity, of a placid surface hiding something much more volatile underneath, became a central thematic thread that Refn would carry through the entire production. Once Refn came on board, the screenplay underwent substantial revision. Refn and Amini worked together closely to reshape earlier drafts, and this collaborative process was aided by an unusual living arrangement during production. While the film was in the works, Refn had several cast and crew members move in temporarily with him, his wife, and his two daughters at their home in Los Angeles. Among those who lived with the Refn family for a stretch during this period were Carey Mulligan, who would go on to play Irene, and screenwriter Hossein Amini himself. The intention behind this arrangement was to create a kind of immersive environment where everyone involved could live and breathe the world of the film together, rather than treating the process as a series of disconnected business meetings. It was during this period of close collaboration that Ref and Amini made some of the more significant changes to the original script, further departing from the earlier Jackman Marshall version and pushing the story toward the tone and structure that would eventually appear on screen. Casting decisions for the supporting roles came together throughout this pre-production period, often through happenstance or personal instinct as much as formal auditions. Bryan Cranston was cast in the role of Shannon, the driver's boss and mentor figure who runs the garage and arranges his side work. Refn had specifically wanted to cast Cranston because he was a fan of the actor's work on the television series Breaking Bad, which was then in the middle of its celebrated run. Knowing that Cranston had other opportunities and commitments competing for his time, Refn grew anxious when he did not hear back from the actor after reaching out. He eventually decided to call Cranston directly. As it turned out, Cranston was at that very moment sitting down and writing out a list of the pros and cons of taking the role for himself, trying to decide whether the part was worth pursuing. Refn's phone call and the evident personal interest behind it moved Cranston, and he ultimately accepted the part. Christina Hendricks, who plays the smaller role of Blanche, came to the production through a similarly personal connection. Refn has explained that in trying to keep the film grounded in a more reality arena for a character like Blanche, the production had originally considered casting an actress with a background in pornographic film, feeling that such casting might lend an added layer of grit and authenticity to the role. According to some accounts of the casting process, however, the production could not find a performer from that background who possessed the acting skills the role demanded. Refn's wife, having seen photographs of Christina Hendricks and finding her striking, recommended the actress for the part instead, and after meeting her, the filmmakers concluded that Hendricks' commanding screen presence would suit the character well. The role of Bernie Rose, the soft-spoken but ultimately ruthless mobster who becomes the film's true antagonist, went to Albert Brooks, a significant departure for an actor primarily known for his work in comedy. Ron Perlman, meanwhile, was cast as Nino, Bernie's volatile and much less controlled partner in crime. Perlman has recounted the moment that sealed his casting, recalling a conversation in which he told the filmmakers, "I always wanted to play a Jewish man who wants to be an Italian gangster," and when asked why, responded, "Because that's what I am, a Jewish boy from New York." That admission, delivered with the kind of blunt honesty the character himself might have appreciated, cemented Perlman's casting in the filmmakers' minds. Oscar Isaac was cast as Standard, the ex-convict husband of Irene, who is released from prison roughly a week after Irene and the driver first crossed paths, setting the plot's central heist in motion. Isaac has spoken about finding the character somewhat unappealing on the page at first, describing Standard in his original conception as a fairly archetypal figure, the deadbeat husband, the obstacle to the central romance. Working with Refn, though, Isaac found ways to deepen the part. As Isaac recalled, as soon as he sat down with Refn, the director explained the broader universe and internal logic of the story, And together they reshaped Standard into a more specific and sympathetic figure, someone with a genuine dream of one day owning a restaurant, a man who had made some serious mistakes in his past and ended up in a difficult, compromised position as a result. By making Standard a more fully realized and interesting character rather than a flat plot device, Isaac and Refn felt they made the entire story more compelling and emotionally coherent. Behind the camera, one of the key hires for the production was Beth Mickle, who came aboard as the film's production designer on Ryan Gosling's personal recommendation. The two had previously worked together on the 2006 drama Half Nelson, another film that had starred Gosling. For Mickle, Drive represented her most expensive production to date, and she has spoken about feeling considerably freer creatively given the larger budget compared to the far more modest scale of Half Nelson. As she put it, there was another zero added to the budget this time around. Prior to filming, Mickle oversaw a production design crew of roughly 40 people, and the team frequently worked 16 to 18-hour days to get the physical world of the film ready in time. Mickle's team took on a number of ambitious build projects for the production. They constructed the driver's apartment building essentially from scratch, including a hallway and elevator connecting his unit to the one occupied by Irene and her son, allowing for the kind of proximity and accidental encounters that the story required. The team also built out an entire strip club set, as well as the apartment belonging to Bernie Rose, staging it inside an otherwise abandoned building. Perhaps the most demanding single task Mickle's department faced was transforming an unremarkable run-of-the-mill Los Angeles auto body shop into the kind of grandiose upscale dealership that appears in the film. To achieve the desired look, the team painted the walls of the space an electric blue, then filled the showroom floor with a selection of vintage automobiles to complete the transformation. A recurring point that both Mickle and Refn have emphasized about the overall visual approach of Drive is its distinctive juxtaposition of time periods. Although the story is explicitly set in the present day, the finished film carries a pronounced 1980s atmosphere throughout, an effect achieved through a careful combination of the vehicles chosen for the production, the synth-driven music, the styling of the clothing worn by the cast, and even the selection of architecture used as backdrops throughout Los Angeles. This blending of a contemporary setting with a heavily 1980s inflected sensibility became one of the most widely discussed and imitated aspects of the film's overall style once it was released. Refn has also discussed at length the broader artistic and thematic influences that shaped his vision for the film during this development period. He has cited the 1968 film Bullitt, one of the defining car chase films of its era, as well as the 1975 film The Day of the Locust, a dark meditation on the underside of the Hollywood dream, as key touchstones. He has also described Drive as something of a tribute to the surrealist filmmaker Alejandro Jodorowsky, whose influence can be felt in the film's occasional lurches into heightened, almost dreamlike imagery and its willingness to let ordinary scenes suddenly erupt into shocking violence. Refn has spoken about being especially moved by Jodorowsky's body of work, going so far as to note in one interview that Drive owes such a debt to the director that the film is effectively dedicated to him. Elsewhere, Refn has said that the story's central romantic thread, the quiet, mostly wordless connection between the driver and Irene, was partly inspired by the films of writer-director John Hughes, better known for teen-oriented pictures from the 1980s. Ryan Gosling has echoed this sentiment in his own way, at times describing Drive as something like a violent John Hughes movie, blending the tender adolescent sincerity of Hughes's films with a considerably harder and more brutal edge. Refn has also spoken about a more personal wellspring of inspiration behind the project. His own experience reading Grimm's fairy tales to his daughter in the years before making the film. He has explained that his underlying goal with the Drive was to construct something like a fairy tale using Los Angeles itself as the backdrop, with the driver cast in the role of a knight-errant hero moving through a modern urban landscape rather than a medieval forest. In interviews, Refn elaborated on this framework, describing the driver as a kind of knight, Irene as the innocent maiden of the story, Albert Brooks's Bernie Rose as the story's evil king, and Ron Perlman's Nino as a dragon to be slain. He has suggested that this fairy tale structure allowed the characters to function as clear archetypes, stripped of some of the messier psychological realism that might otherwise complicate such a heightened stylized story. Refn has also noted that the film's Los Angeles, despite being a sprawling city of millions of people, is presented as a place where the driver and the other characters seem almost entirely isolated, rarely surrounded by crowds or strangers, a deliberate choice meant to intensify the emotional isolation of the central figures and make their connections to one another feel more singular and important. With the screenplay reworked, the cast assembled, and the physical sets under construction, the production moved from its extended development phase into active pre-production and eventually principal photography. The film ultimately proceeded on a comparatively modest production budget of about $15 million, a relatively small figure by the standards of studio filmmaking, but one that afforded Redfern and his collaborators enough resources to realize their specific stylized vision without the creative compromises that a larger, more commercially cautious budget might have demanded. Filming principal photography on Drive began on September 25, 2010, and the production was shot almost entirely on location in various parts of Los Angeles, the city that effectively becomes a character in its own right throughout the film. Filming continued for a little under 2 months, wrapping on November 12, 2010. Given the $15 million budget, the shoot was a tightly run operation by studio standards, and the filmmakers had to make careful, often resourceful choices about how to allocate their limited time and money across the film's various set pieces. One of the defining technical choices of the production involved how the extensive driving and car chase sequences were captured on camera. The filmmakers used what is known as a biscuit rig for many of the car scenes, a specialized camera car rig that had originally been developed for the 2003 film Seabiscuit. This rig allowed a professional stunt driver, Robert Nagel, to physically steer and control the vehicle from an external position while Ryan Gosling sat inside performing the acting work, freed from having to simultaneously manage the mechanics of actually driving the car at speed. This technical solution meant that Gosling could focus entirely on his facial expressions, body language, and internal performance during even the most intense chase sequences, while a professional took care of the driving itself. That said, Gosling was not entirely hands-off when it came to the film's stunt work. Despite the many credited stunt drivers on the production, Gosling performed a number of stunts himself, reportedly after completing a stunt driving car crash course to prepare for the physical demands of the role. Gosling's commitment to the part extended well beyond the stunts as well. During production, he took it upon himself to rebuild the 1973 Chevrolet Malibu used as the driver's car in the film, personally taking the vehicle apart and reassembling it as a way of connecting more deeply with the character and the car that defined so much of his identity on screen. Cinematographer Newton Thomas Sigel, working closely with Refn, developed a visual approach for the film that was consistent with the director's established aesthetic sensibilities from his earlier work. Sigel made extensive use of wide-angle lenses throughout the shoot, a choice that helped situate the characters within their environments and gave many of the film's compositions a distinctive, slightly heightened sense of space. Sigel also made a deliberate decision to avoid handheld camera work almost entirely, favoring more controlled, stabilized camera movements that contributed to the film's cool, deliberate rhythm, a stark departure from the shaky, kinetic camera style that had become common in many contemporary action films. This preference for restraint extended to the production's approach to visual effects as well. Wanting to keep the film feeling grounded and tangible, the filmmakers avoided the use of computer-generated imagery almost entirely. Budget limitations were certainly a factor behind this decision, since CGI work of the kind used in larger action productions would have been prohibitively expensive on a $15 million budget, but the choice also reflected a genuine artistic preference on the part of Refn and Sigel for practical in-camera effects that would give the film's violence and action a heavier, more physically real quality. The film's technical specifications reflect this hybrid, resourceful approach to a modestly budgeted production. Drive was shot digitally using a combination of camera systems, including the RE Alexa, the Canon EOS 5D Mark II, the Iconix HDR H1, and the Vicecam HS2, paired with a range of lenses, including Ingenio Optimo Zoom lenses, Cooke S4 lenses, and Zeiss Master Prime lenses. This mixture of camera bodies allowed the production to capture footage from a variety of angles and setups, including some of the more compact rigs suited to the tight confines of a car's interior, while still achieving a cohesive and polished overall visual look across the finished film. The opening sequence of Drive, one of the most acclaimed and frequently discussed passages in the entire film, presented its own unique set of logistical challenges during the shoot. The sequence, which follows the driver expertly evading a police pursuit after ferrying two burglars away from a crime scene, was conceived with the specific intention of keeping the audience's perspective locked almost entirely within the car itself, aiming to give viewers a feeling something like being a diver in the ocean with a lot of sharks, vulnerable, hemmed in, and dependent entirely on the skill of the person at the wheel to escape danger. Because the production was working under considerable pressure in terms of both money and time, this pivotal sequence was reportedly filmed in just 2 days. Initially, the production attempted to capture the necessary coverage using two cameras positioned in and around the vehicle, but the filmmakers soon discovered that achieving the kind of mobility and range of angles they wanted within the confined space of the car was extremely difficult with only two camera setups. In response, two additional camera devices were added near the car to expand the available coverage and give the editors more material to work with when assembling the sequence later. The lighting choices for this sequence and for the film's nighttime driving scenes more broadly were also carefully considered, because the lighting conditions in downtown Los Angeles had by that point become considerably brighter than in earlier decades. The filmmakers made a point of avoiding certain overly illuminated areas of the city in order to preserve the moodier, more gloomily atmospheric look they wanted for the film's nocturnal sequences. Beyond the opening chase, the film's subsequent action sequences were similarly modest in scale compared to what a bigger budget version of the project, the kind that might have existed had the earlier Hugh Jackman incarnation of the film gone forward, would likely have included. By some accounts from those involved in analyzing the production, the film contains only 3 substantial car chase sequences in total. The opening evasion of the police, a chase that occurs after a robbery goes wrong partway through the film, and a later pursuit in which the driver goes after Nino on the road. Compared to the scale that had reportedly been planned for the earlier Jackman-led version of the project, these sequences in the finished film are considerably smaller and more contained. For the pivotal post-robbery chase sequence, for example, Refn had only one vehicle available to crash and only a single take to successfully capture the stunt, given the constraints of the budget. Some accounts of the production have described the resulting crash itself as visually underwhelming on its own terms, and note that a supplementary shot of Christina Hendricks's character reacting inside the driver's car as the crash occurs in the background was instrumental in salvaging the moment's dramatic impact for the finished film. Fake blood and practical makeup effects were used extensively on set for the film's more violent sequences, particularly its 2 most notorious moments of sudden, graphic bloodshed, a stairwell confrontation, and a scene in a diner, both of which would go on to become widely discussed and, in some cases, controversial once the film reached audiences. According to some accounts of the production, additional gore effects beyond what was captured practically on set were incorporated later during post-production to further heighten the visceral impact of these key sequences. Beyond the technical and stunt work, the shoot also gave Refn the opportunity to continue refining performances and character dynamics established during the earlier development period. The close, almost communal atmosphere fostered during pre-production, with several key collaborators having lived together at Refn's home, appears to have carried over into the working relationships on set, with cast members frequently describing a strong sense of trust and creative partnership with the director throughout the shoot. This was particularly evident in the way small, quiet character moments were captured. Long stretches of the film rely on wordless glances and understated body language rather than dialogue to convey the emotional relationship between the driver and Irene, and these scenes required a level of comfort and trust between Gosling, Mulligan, and Riffin that appears to have been cultivated well before cameras ever started rolling. By the time filming wrapped on November 12, 2010, the production had captured all of the material needed to assemble the finished 99-minute feature, setting the stage for a post-production process that would prove just as crucial to the film's ultimate identity as anything captured during the shoot itself. Post-production, once photography concluded in late 2010, the film moved into an extended post-production process that would ultimately shape much of what audiences would come to regard as most distinctive about Drive. Editor Matthew Newman was responsible for assembling the footage into its final form, a task that involved not only the usual work of pacing and structure, but also finding a rhythm that could accommodate the film's unusual mixture of near-silent, contemplative stretches and sudden explosive bursts of violence. The editing had to walk a careful line, allowing scenes to breathe and linger in a way that built tension and atmosphere, while still keeping the film moving forward with enough narrative momentum to satisfy a mainstream theatrical audience. Visual effects work on the film, though deliberately minimized in keeping with the production's practical in-camera philosophy, was still handled by a handful of specialized effects houses, including Ring of Fire Studios and Wildfire Visual Effects, credited for supplementary visual effects work where it was needed to support scenes that could not be achieved entirely through practical means. Sound post-production services were provided in part by Sound One, working on the film's overall sound design and mix, while additional voice work was handled through ADR casting services to fill in and sharpen dialogue that needed further refinement after the shoot. Sound design in particular became one of the most celebrated technical achievements associated with the finished film, and this attention would later be reflected in the film's sole Academy Award nomination. Sound editors Lon Bender and Victor Ray Ennis were responsible for constructing the film's intricate soundscape, blending the roar of engines, the crunch of violence, and long stretches of near silence into a sound design that critics would later single out as one of the film's most powerful, if understated, elements. Their work on the film earned them a nomination for Best Sound Editing at the 84th Academy Awards, one of the relatively few instances of formal, top-tier industry recognition the film received, and a testament to how much craft and attention went into a component of the film that many casual viewers might not consciously register. Also folded into the post-production period was the crucial decision-making process around the film's score and soundtrack, an element so central to the finished film's identity that it deserves its own extended discussion. What began as one plan for the film's music changed dramatically during this stage of the process, ultimately resulting in one of the most acclaimed and influential soundtracks of the era. Music occupies an unusually central place in the identity of Drive, to the point where the film's soundtrack has, in the years since its release, become almost as celebrated and culturally influential as the movie itself. The process by which that soundtrack came together, however, was considerably more complicated and last-minute than the polished, cohesive final product might suggest. Initially, the task of composing the film's original score was given to Johnny Jewel, a musician and producer best known as the creative force behind the bands Chromatics and Glass Candy, both associated with the Italians' Do It Better record label and its distinctive brand of moody, retro-futuristic synthpop. Jewel's music and the broader sonic world of his associated acts had clearly captured Refn's imagination during the film's development, since the director wanted the finished score to carry that same kind of atmospheric, nostalgic electronic quality. However, at a relatively late stage in the production process, the studio ultimately made the decision to replace Jewel as the film's composer, instead hiring composer Cliff Martinez to take over scoring duties, with the explicit goal of having Martinez imitate the style and feel of Jewel's own bands. Refn gave Martinez a sampling of the specific songs and sounds he wanted the score to emulate, and asked the composer to work in that general sonic direction, aiming for what has been described as a kind of retro 80ish synthesizer Europop quality throughout the film's underscore. Martinez notably brought an unusual musical background to the job. Before establishing himself as a film composer, he had been a drummer in his younger years, playing in several Los Angeles punk bands after moving to California from Ohio in his early 20s, and he is perhaps best known in music circles for having drummed on the first two albums by the Red Hot Chili Peppers. That background as a drummer, oddly enough, seems to have informed his eventual embrace of electronic composition. Martinez has said in interviews that as a drummer looking at a drum machine, he essentially felt he was looking at his own obsolescence, a realization that pushed him toward embracing digital technology, programming, and composition rather than clinging to purely acoustic instrumentation. By the time he was brought on to Drive, Martinez had already built a substantial career as a film composer, having worked extensively with director Steven Soderbergh on films including Sex, Lies, and Videotape, Kafka, The Limey, Solaris, and Traffic, the last of which earned Martinez a Grammy nomination. Even though Jewel was ultimately removed from the composing role, his musical fingerprint remained deeply embedded in the finished film in a different form. Jewel's own music, through his work with chromatics, ended up being used directly within the film's soundtrack, most notably in the track Tick of the Clock, which appears prominently over one of the film's key sequences. Jewel would later take the unused score material he had originally composed for Drive and rework it into a separate release titled Themes for an Imaginary Film, issued as the debut album of his side project Symmetry, an unusual coda to his complicated involvement in the film's musical journey. Speaking years later about the film's impact, Jewel described the soundtrack's particular blend of sonic and visual nostalgia mixed with a contemporary spin as something he considered always deadly in its effectiveness. Reflecting on how thoroughly that combination resonated with audiences and other musicians in the years following the film's release, beyond Martinez's score and the chromatics track carried over from Jewel's involvement, the film soundtrack was rounded out by a small, carefully curated selection of licensed songs, each chosen to reinforce the retro, neon-lit 1980s influenced aesthetic that defines so much of the film's visual and emotional texture. Among the most significant of these was Night Call by the French electro house artist Kavinsky, featuring vocals from Love Fox of the band CSS. The track, a brooding, robotic slice of synth-driven melancholy, was suggested for the film's opening credits by editor Matthew Newman, and it went on to become one of the most instantly recognizable and widely referenced pieces of music associated with the movie, playing over the film's hot pink title sequence, a stylistic choice reportedly inspired by the opening titles of the 1983 film Risky Business. Kavinsky, whose real name is Vincent Belorgi, had co-produced the track with Guy Manuel de Homem Christo of the French electronic duo Daft Punk, and the song's cinematic 1980s referencing sound proved to be an almost perfect match for the film's visual world. Other key licensed tracks included Under Your Spell by the musical Project Desire, A Real Hero by College featuring Electric Youth and Oh My Love, a song by the Italian composer Riz Ortolani featuring vocalist Katina Ranieri that had originally been recorded decades earlier and was repurposed for the film to evoke a certain timeless romantic quality. Of these, A Real Hero arguably became the single most iconic and enduring piece of music associated with the film outside of Martinez's score and Night Call itself. The song, a hypnotic, gently propulsive collaboration between the producer known as College and the Canadian duo Electric Youth, plays over some of the film's most tender and quietly devastating moments involving the driver, and has frequently been singled out by critics and music writers in the years since as the soundtrack's single most memorable and emotionally resonant track, functioning almost as a kind of mantra for the driver's own quiet, understated sense of heroism and benevolence. The curation of these licensed pre-existing tracks reportedly involved close collaboration between the production's music supervisor and Johnny Jewel himself, even after Jewel had been removed from the composing role for the original score. Jewel is understood to have helped source additional material from artists connected to the Italians Do It Better label, drawing on shared influences ranging from the ambient electronic pioneers Tangerine Dream to the atmospheric compositions of Brian Eno, all in service of the neo-noir, retro-futuristic vision of Los Angeles that Refn wanted the film's soundtrack to embody. Because the songs favored for the soundtrack were relatively niche and unconventional by the standards of a major studio release at the time, securing the necessary licensing rights for tracks like Night Call and A Real Hero required the production to negotiate directly and individually with independent artists and smaller labels during both the pre-production and post-production phases of the film. Rather than relying on the kind of established relationships a studio might typically use to license more mainstream, chart-friendly music, the soundtrack album itself, formerly titled Drive, Original Motion Picture Soundtrack, was released digitally on September 6, 2011, ahead of the film's theatrical debut, and followed by physical CD and vinyl releases through Lakeshore Records later that month, with the CD version arriving on September 19, 2011, and physical formats more broadly following on September 27, 2011. In an unusual and much discussed marketing move, the soundtrack was also released as a limited cassette tape exclusively through the retailer Urban Outfitters, a decision that only added to the soundtrack's growing reputation as a favorite among a certain hip, culturally engaged audience segment. The 19-track album blended Martinez's original ambient and electronic score cues, bearing bluntly descriptive titles such as I Drive, He Had a Good Time, They Broke His Pelvis, and Kick Your Teeth. With the small but potent selection of pre-existing songs discussed above, even before the film's wide theatrical release, buzz around the soundtrack had begun to build, fueled in large part by word of mouth spreading across social media platforms, particularly Twitter, among early audiences who had caught the film at festival screenings. This grassroots enthusiasm helped propel the Drive soundtrack to the top of the iTunes album charts shortly after its digital release, reaching as high as the 4th position within roughly a week of becoming available. On the Billboard Top 200 Albums chart, the soundtrack eventually peaked at position 35, a notable achievement for a film score and soundtrack album, particularly one built around such a distinctly non-mainstream selection of electronic and ambient music. The album's commercial performance received a further boost several months later when it re-entered the charts around February 2012 to coincide with the film's home media release. In the years since its initial release, the Drive soundtrack has continued to be recognized as one of the more culturally significant and influential film music releases of its era. It was later included on Spin magazine's list of the 40 movie soundtracks that changed alternative music, a testament to how thoroughly the album's particular blend of moody synthpop and ambient scoring rippled outward into broader popular music culture, helping to popularize and mainstream a retro synth aesthetic that would go on to influence a considerable amount of music released in the years that followed, often grouped loosely under the synthwave label. In September 2016, to mark the 5th anniversary of the film's release, Lakeshore Records and Invada Records issued a special anniversary edition pressing of the soundtrack featuring new liner notes and fresh artwork, and accompanied by retrospective interviews with several of the key musicians involved, including Johnny Jewel, the Duo College, and Electric Youth, and Cliff Martinez himself, all reflecting on the soundtrack's lasting impact on both their own careers and on the broader landscape of contemporary music, rarely is theatrical well before Drive reached ordinary moviegoers in commercial theaters. The film had already begun building its reputation on the international festival circuit, where its earliest audiences responded with an intensity that would help set the tone for everything that followed. The film's most consequential early screening came at the 2011 Cannes Film Festival, where it premiered in competition on May 11. The response from the crowd that night was extraordinary. Drive reportedly received a 15-minute standing ovation following its screening, an overwhelming display of enthusiasm that quickly became one of the most talked about moments of that year's festival. That enthusiasm translated into tangible recognition a short time later when the festival's jury awarded Nicholas Winding Refn the Best Director prize for his work on the film. Accepting the award, Refn offered an emotionally candid speech Thanking his mother on stage and recalling that she had always told him he was a genius, whatever he chose to do, a moment of personal vulnerability that stood in sharp contrast to the cold, controlled violence of the film itself, and one that many observers felt captured something essential about Refn's particular sensibility as an artist. Notably, the 2011 edition of Cannes was dominated in terms of overall industry attention by Terrence Malick's The Tree of Life, which took home the festival's top prize, the Palme d'Or, and drew considerable attention thanks to the presence of major stars like Brad Pitt. Even so, Drive managed to carve out its own significant share of the festival's buzz and critical conversation, emerging from Cannes with real momentum heading toward its eventual commercial release. Following its triumphant Cannes debut, Drive continued to build word of mouth through a series of additional festival screenings over the following months. The film screened at the Los Angeles Film Festival on June 20 as part of that festival's gala screenings program, appearing among a lineup of more than 200 feature films, short projects, and music videos drawn from over 30 countries around the world. The film also found its way into the closing night slot at the Melbourne International Film Festival, stepping into that position after the release date for another film, Red Dog, was moved up by several days, opening a scheduling gap that Drive was brought in to fill. The production also received exposure to a somewhat different audience segment when it was featured during Film District's studio panel presentation at San Diego Comic-Con, a venue more commonly associated with major blockbuster franchises than a stylish art house-inflected crime drama, but one that nonetheless helped extend the film's visibility to a broader base of engaged genre fans. A secret screening of the film was also arranged at London's Empire Big Screen event in the middle of August, generating further advance buzz in the United Kingdom ahead of its eventual local release. In September, shortly before its wide commercial opening, Drive screened as a special presentation at the 2011 Toronto International Film Festival, appearing there alongside another film starring Ryan Gosling that same year, The Ides of March, giving audiences and press at that influential festival a chance to see two very different sides of Gosling's range as an actor within the same festival lineup. Drive finally received its wide theatrical release in the United States on September 16, 2011, distributed by Film District. The film opened on a substantial scale for a movie with its relatively modest quarter of the budget scope, playing in roughly 2,886 theater locations across approximately 3,100 screens nationwide. It was one of a crowded slate of films opening that particular weekend. 12 movies in total, including Drive, opened on September 16, 2011. A group that also included titles such as Straw Dogs, I Don't Know How She Does It, and Restless. Despite this crowded field, Drive made a strong showing on its opening day, generating slightly more than $4 million in ticket sales domestically on that first day of release alone. The film's marketing campaign built heavily around Gosling's star power, and the film's stylish, cool aesthetic proved successful in generating awareness, even as some in the industry debated after the fact whether the marketing had oversold the film's action movie elements relative to its more meditative, art house sensibilities, a tension that would later surface in unusual ways among some segments of the film's paying audience. Internationally, Drive rolled out over the following weeks and months across a range of territories, generating some notably strong results in individual markets. In one European territory, the film opened in second place at the local box office and achieved the highest per-screen theater average of any film playing that particular weekend, generating roughly €10,722, equivalent to about $13,786 per screen, an unusually strong per-location result reflecting the film's ability to draw dedicated, enthusiastic audiences even in more limited release patterns. The film's second highest overseas gross came from the United Kingdom, where Drive ultimately earned a total of roughly £3.1 million, or about $4.6 million. The film opened in the United Kingdom on September 27, 2011, playing initially in 176 theaters before expanding its footprint to 190 locations as word of mouth continued to build. Drive also opened in Australia on October 27, 2011, where it went on to gross a total of approximately $2 $3 million in that market, home media following the conclusion of its theatrical run, Drive made its way to the home entertainment market in the early months of 2012. The film was released on DVD and Blu-ray in the United States on January 31, 2012, giving audiences who had missed the film during its theatrical window or who simply wanted to revisit its distinctive visual and sonic textures on repeat viewings their first opportunity to bring the film into their own homes. The home media release proved to be another significant commercial chapter in the film's overall financial story, generating strong sales that further extended the reach and cultural footprint of a film that had already built up a passionate following during its time in theaters. The release also had a notable ripple effect on the film's celebrated soundtrack, which saw a meaningful resurgence on music sales and streaming charts around February 2012, timed closely to coincide with the DVD and Blu-ray release, as newly minted fans of the film sought out the music that had played such a defining role in their experience of it. The home media packages for Drive typically included a range of bonus features designed to give audiences deeper insight into the film's distinctive production. These extras often explored aspects of Refn's directing style, the collaborative relationship between Refn and Gosling, and the unusual, resourceful approach the production took to its action sequences and practical effects work, giving newly arrived fans of the film a chance to learn more about the creative decisions and behind-the-scenes circumstances that had shaped the finished product. Given how much critical attention had already been paid to the film's cinematography, sound design, and music by the time of its home media release, these supplementary materials tended to focus heavily on unpacking exactly how such a distinctive, hyper-stylized sensibility had been achieved on a relatively modest budget. In the years following its initial home media release, Drive has continued to enjoy a healthy afterlife across various home entertainment formats and platforms, benefiting from the kind of sustained cult following that has kept audiences returning to the film well beyond its initial commercial window. Its striking visual style, deliberately restrained pacing, and now iconic soundtrack have made it a frequently revisited touchstone film for cinephiles and casual viewers alike, the sort of movie that continues to attract new audiences discovering it years after its original release, whether through streaming platforms, physical media reissues, or simple word of mouth passed between fans eager to introduce others to its particular blend of romance, violence, and neon lit style. Reception box office. Given its modest production budget of roughly $15 million, Drive ultimately proved to be a clear commercial success, though the precise figure cited for its total worldwide gross varies somewhat depending on the source and the point in time at which the figure was compiled, with tallies ranging from approximately $1 million to slightly more than $81 million worldwide over the course of its theatrical run. Whichever precise figure is used, the film comfortably recouped its production costs many times over, even before accounting for the additional revenue generated through its home media release, marketing tie-ins, and ongoing licensing of its soundtrack. The film's opening in the United States, playing across roughly 2,886 locations on about 3,100 screens, generated slightly more than $4 million in ticket sales on its first day alone, a solid, if not spectacular, start for a film of its budget and positioning within a crowded late summer release calendar that also included titles like Straw Dogs, I Don't Know How She Does It, and Restless, opening the very same weekend. In the days immediately following the film's release, some entertainment industry commentary focused specifically on questions about the film's audience composition and how effectively its marketing had reached its intended viewers. Notably, a widely discussed piece from Deadline Hollywood examined the film's opening weekend performance under the pointed headline, asking why young guys hadn't shown up for the film in the numbers the studio might have hoped for, suggesting that some of the marketing campaign's emphasis on fast cars and action had potentially set up expectations among certain demographic segments that the film's slower, more meditative pacing did not ultimately satisfy. This tension between the film's marketing and its actual content became most vividly and somewhat infamously illustrated by a consumer lawsuit filed in the weeks following the film's release. In October 2011, a Michigan woman named Sarah Deming filed suit against both Film District, the film's American distributor, and Imagine Theaters, a chain with a location in Novi, Michigan, alleging that she had suffered damages as a result of what she considered misleading promotional trailers for the film. Filing her claim under the Michigan Consumer Protection Act, Deming argued that the film had been marketed in a manner suggesting it was similar in style and content to the Fast and the Furious franchise, when in fact the finished film contained comparatively little actual car racing, and she characterized the situation as something of a bait and switch on the part of the distributor. Deming's complaint reportedly went further, also raising concerns about what she perceived as anti-Semitic themes within the film, likely a reference to elements of the film's central mobster characters. Through her lawsuit, Deming sought a refund of the cost of her movie ticket and indicated an intention to pursue a broader class action lawsuit aimed at preventing what she considered false advertising practices in future film promotional campaigns. The case attracted a notable amount of media attention at the time, in part because of the seeming disproportion between the relatively small financial stakes involved for an individual moviegoer and the broader, somewhat philosophical questions it raised about the responsibilities of film marketing campaigns to accurately represent a movie's tone and content to prospective audiences. Despite this particular controversy and the broader questions raised about the film's marketing strategy, Drive continued to perform respectably at the box office as it expanded into international markets over the following weeks and months. Its rollout across various European territories produced some particularly strong results on a per-screen basis. In at least one market, the film opened in second place overall, while achieving the single highest per-screen average of any film playing that weekend, an unusually strong showing that reflected how enthusiastically the film's core audience of cinephiles and genre fans turned out, even where the film played on a comparatively limited number of screens. The United Kingdom proved to be one of the film's stronger overseas markets in absolute terms, with the film ultimately grossing roughly $4.6 million there after opening on September 27, 2011 in 176 theaters and later expanding to 190. Australia, where the film opened on October 27, 2011, contributed a further $2.3 million to the film's international total. Taken as a whole, the film's box office performance represented a clear win for its distributor, Film District, and for the various production companies involved, including Bold Films, Mark Platt Productions, and Odd Lot Entertainment. A film made for roughly $15 million that went on to gross somewhere in the neighborhood of $80 million worldwide, before even accounting for the additional revenue generated by its home media release and its widely popular soundtrack, stands as a genuine commercial success story and one that helped cement Refn's standing within the American film industry following his prior, more internationally focused body of work. Critical response, if the film's box office performance told a story of solid, if occasionally contested, commercial success, its reception among professional film critics told an even more emphatic story of near universal acclaim. On the review aggregation website Rotten Tomatoes, Drive consistently registered an approval rating in the low to mid 90s percentile range across the hundreds of reviews collected by the site over time, with figures cited in various compilations ranging from around 92% to as high as 93% positive reviews, and an average critic rating in the neighborhood of 8.2 to 8.3 out of 10. The site's official critical consensus statement summarized the prevailing critical sentiment succinctly, describing the film's hyper-stylized blend of violence, music, and striking imagery as representing a fully realized vision of art house action. On Metacritic, another prominent review aggregation platform that calculates a weighted average score based on critic reviews, Drive earned a score in the high 70s out of a possible 100, with figures cited variously as 78 or 79 out of 100 based on more than 40 individual critic reviews, a result the site categorized as indicating generally favorable reviews. Critics writing about the film in the days surrounding its theatrical release consistently praised a similar cluster of elements. Refn's confident controlled direction, Newton Thomas Sigel's evocative cinematography, the uniformly strong performances from the cast, with particular attention lavished on Ryan Gosling's minimalist, magnetic lead performance and on Albert Brooks' unexpected and chilling turn as the softly menacing mobster Bernie Rose. The film's striking neon and shadow visual sensibility, its precisely staged action sequences, and its now legendary musical score and soundtrack selections. Peter Travers of Rolling Stone, one of the most prominent and enthusiastic supporters of the film among major American critics, awarded Drive a full 4 out of 4 stars in his review, declaring it a brilliant piece of nasty business and praising Refn as a virtuoso, blending tough and tender with such uncanny skill that he deservedly won the Best Director prize at Cannes. Travers would go on to name Drive his choice for the best film of the year, a distinction he shared with a number of other prominent critics, including Richard Roper of the Chicago Sun-Times, James Rocky writing for Box Office magazine, Joshua Rothkopf of Time Out New York, Neil Miller of Film School Rejects, Mark Russell of The Oregonian, and an unnamed staff critic writing for Empire magazine, whose editorial staff collectively selected Drive as their #1 film of 2011. More broadly, Drive proved to be one of the most frequently cited and highly ranked films across the various year-end top 10 lists compiled by film critics for 2011. According to Metacritic's aggregated tally of those year-end critics lists, Drive placed as the 4th best film of the year overall, trailing only Terrence Malick's The Tree of Life, Michel Hazanavicius's The Artist, and Lars von Trier's Melancholia, a remarkably strong showing for a genre film with clear roots in pulpy crime fiction, placed alongside a trio of films more conventionally associated with prestige art house filmmaking. Not every notable critic joined in the widespread praise, however, and the film's more divisive elements, particularly its abrupt, extremely graphic bursts of violence set against long stretches of quiet, restrained tension, proved to be a genuine sticking point for a smaller but vocal contingent of dissenting critics. David Edelstein, writing for New York Magazine, offered one of the more pointed negative assessments of the film, characterizing it as higher trash and suggesting that it was ultimately about as intellectually substantive as a film like Conan the Barbarian, despite its art house trappings and critical pedigree. Edelstein also took aim at Gosling specifically for choosing to appear in the production, suggesting that much of the film's audience would likely be drawn in primarily by the star power of its cast rather than by any genuine appreciation for its artistic merits. Michael Phillips of the Chicago Tribune offered a more mixed, though still largely critical assessment, acknowledging that he found the film's pre-credit opening sequence to be among the most gripping openings of the entire year in film, while ultimately concluding that the movie devolved over its runtime into what he described as a muddle of ultra-violence, hypocrisy, and stylistic preening. Neil Rosen, reviewing the film for NY1, echoed a version of this same critique, adding his own observation that he found the film's depiction of violence to come across as somewhat lackluster and unearned relative to the considerable build-up and stylistic weight the film placed around it. These pockets of dissent notwithstanding, the overwhelming critical consensus around Drive remained overwhelmingly positive, and this critical enthusiasm translated into a substantial array of formal awards recognition across the ensuing months, even if the film's presence at the very top tier of major American award ceremonies, such as the Academy Awards, proved comparatively limited. As previously noted, sound editors Lon Bender and Victor A. Ennis earned the film's sole Academy Award nomination in the Best Sound Editing category at the 84th Academy Awards, where the film competed against films including Hugo and the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. At the 65th British Academy Film Awards, the film performed rather more strongly, earning 4 total nominations: Best Film, Best Direction for Refn, Best Editing for Matthew Newman, and Best Supporting Actress for Carey Mulligan's performance as Irene. Production designer Beth Mickle also received formal recognition for her contributions to the film's distinctive visual world, earning a nomination for Excellence in Production Design for a Contemporary Film at the 16th Art Directors Guild Awards, The film performed especially well among various critics, organizations, and guild-style award bodies throughout award season. It swept all three categories in which it was nominated at the Austin Film Critics Association's annual awards, including prizes for Best Director awarded to Refn and Best Adapted Screenplay awarded to Hossein Amini. At the 17th Critics' Choice Awards, the film won a single category, Best Action Movie, out of 8 total nominations it received from that body. Composer Cliff Martinez received particular acclaim for his contribution to the film, winning the Best Original Score prize from the Chicago Film Critics Association and earning 2 separate nominations at the 12th World Soundtrack Academy Awards in the categories of Best Soundtrack of the Year and Soundtrack Composer of the Year. Among the film's cast, Albert Brooks emerged as the single most decorated performer connected to Drive during the ensuing award season, earning nominations from a larger number of critics organizations than any other member of the cast for his portrayal of the soft-spoken but ultimately murderous Bernie Rose, a role widely regarded as a striking departure from the comedic work for which Brooks had long been primarily known. His performance earned him a nomination for Best Supporting Actor at the 69th Golden Globe Awards, and he won the Best Supporting Actor prize outright from the National Society of Film Critics, reportedly in a first ballot decision that reflected just how thoroughly critics were struck by his transformation from a familiar comedic persona into a figure of chilling, understated menace. Carey Mulligan, for her part, won the Supporting Actress Prize at the Hollywood Film Awards, an honor recognizing both her work in Drive and her performance that same year in the film Shame. At the 16th Satellite Awards, Drive proved to be one of its most successful showings across any single awards body, earning 8 total nominations and converting 4 of them into wins. Best Director for Refn, Best Actor in a Motion Picture for Gosling, Best Actor in a Supporting Role for Brooks, and a further prize for Best Sound, encompassing both sound editing and sound mixing. Beyond the specific tally of nominations and wins, Drive also earned a broader form of recognition and institutional respect through its inclusion on prestigious Best of the Year lists compiled by bodies such as the National Board of Review, which counted the film among its selections for the best films of 2011. Taken together, the scope and diversity of the film's awards attention, spanning international festival honors, major guild and critics organization prizes, and a formal Academy Award nomination, reflected the degree to which Drive had managed to bridge the gap between genre entertainment and art house respectability, a feat that not many stylish, violent crime thrillers of its era were able to achieve with quite the same degree of critical unanimity. In the years since its initial release and awards run, Drive's critical reputation has, if anything, only continued to grow. The film is now widely regarded as a modern touchstone of the neo-noir genre and one of the defining American films of the early 2010s, frequently cited by film scholars, other filmmakers, and enthusiastic online communities of cinephiles as a key example of stylish, restrained genre filmmaking elevated through meticulous craft. Its visual and sonic influence can be traced through a considerable amount of film, television, music, and even fashion produced in the years following its release, with its particular blend of neon-drenched cinematography, synth-driven scoring, and understated archetypal storytelling, helping to popularize and mainstream an entire aesthetic sensibility that continues to be referenced, imitated, and affectionately parodied across popular culture well over a decade after the film's original theatrical run.